Welcome to Unpacking Peanuts, the podcast where three cartoonists take an in-depth look at the greatest comic strip of all time, Peanuts by Charles M. Schulz.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. It's Unpacking Peanuts, and I'm your host for the proceedings. My name's Jimmy Gownley. I'm also a cartoonist. I did books like Amelia Rules, 7 Good Reasons Not to Grow Up, and The Dumbest Idea Ever. Joining me as always are my pals, co-hosts, and fellow cartoonists. He's a playwright and a composer, both for the band Complicated People, as well as for this very podcast. He's the original editor of Amelia Rules, the co-creator of the original comic book price guide, and the creator of such great strips as Strange Attractors, A Gathering of Spells, and Tangled River. It's Michael Cohen.
Say hey.
And he is the executive producer and writer of Mystery Science Theater 3000, a former vice president of Archie Comics, and the creator of the Instagram sensation Sweetest Beasts. It's Harold Buchholz.
Hello.
We are in 1978, and we managed to talk so much last time that we barely got through any strips. So my vote is that we get right to the comic strips we're going to discuss today. What do you guys say?
Let's do it.
Sure.
All right. Now, if you characters out there want to follow along, you can go to gocomics.com, and they have all the old Peanut strips in there. You can type in 1978 and follow along with us. If you want a heads up as to what we're actually going to be discussing on a strip-by-strip basis, then you could go to unpackingpeanuts.com, sign up for the Great Peanuts Reread, and you'll get a once-a-month newsletter letting you know what exact strips we're going to be discussing on the podcast, so you can follow along that way. And if you're bougie, of course, you can buy the Fantagraphics books. So you guys do that, and we'll get started. Here we go. Second half of 1978, right now. April 23rd. We got one of those old symbolic panels. We have Lucy with a miserable look on her face, and it says number 1 crab underneath her. And 2, she slams the door from outside coming in, I assume. She says, "Boy, do I feel crabby." And in the background, we see Linus watching TV. Linus turns and says to her, "Maybe I can be of help. Why don't you just take my place here in front of the TV while I go and fix you a nice snack? Sometimes we all need a little pampering to help us feel better." Linus walks away. Lucy looks completely dazed by this. He comes back with his little plate of snacks and he says, "See, I came right back. Here's a nice sandwich for you, some chocolate chip cookies, and a cold glass of milk. Now, is there anything else I can get you?" "Is there anything I haven't thought of?" says Linus. And Lucy looks down at her little plate of snacks and says, "Yes, there's one thing that you haven't thought of." And then Lucy screams at the top of her lungs, "I don't want to feel better."
Yeah, as a fellow crab, I totally understand
Yeah,
this.
me too.
Yeah, who wants to feel better? You want to just take it out on everybody.
Although I bet she did nosh a little bit afterward.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And, I have to say, I think this is very nice of Linus. This is a legit sincere attempt. He really did his best, but that was a doomed mission to begin with.
Well, he's basically trying not to get slugged.
April 25th. Snoopy's lying atop his doghouse, and Sally comes up reading a piece of paper. She says, "Now, about this report I'm doing for school." And then she reads the title, "Our Animal Friends." Snoopy's now sitting up. He's listening. She turns and says to him, "I've been wondering what you thought about the title." Then Snoopy lies back down on his back on top of the doghouse and says, "It's probably a little presumptuous."
Yeah. Now, we've been watching Snoopy lately to see, occasionally Schultz is doing these strips where Snoopy has no effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
No reaction, no expression, and this is one of those.
This is also interesting with your forehead watch, Michael, because panel 2...
It's back.
Yeah, but not in panel 4.
Yeah, not in panel 1 either. But panel 2 is your classic forehead.
Yes, laying down thing. He has really changed the way his head is drawn.
Yeah, this is a good. I like this gag with Snoopy. It's just it's.
Well, it is funny because we put all this on our pets and
Snoopy,
he's
right?
this and that, and and it's all me. It's all projection.
Our animal friends.
Yeah, because that goes back to Snoopy handing in his collar when Charlie Brown gives him grief. May 6th. Schroeder and Lucy are hanging out at Schroeder's piano. Schroeder's pounding away at the keys, and Lucy is in her classic leaning on the edge position. She says to Schroeder, "I am highly susceptible to flattery." She continues, "Just the slightest compliment will cause me to melt." Panel 3, she turns to look at Schroeder, who does not look up from his keys, and continues to practice in silence. In panel 4, Lucy turns back away from him and says, "Or so I've always imagined."
I'm really impressed with how much you can get out of this scenario.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still good. They're still really good. This could have been
Absolutely,
a
yeah.
20-year-old strip.
Yes, and it is interesting because so much has changed, so much has been added, so many things even that are still around have evolved, but this has not evolved at all. It's just the two of them in this position, and it really works. This is a thing he also does, like, again and again. He has the place where you'll see, obviously the thinking wall is a variety of characters, but a lot of times it's Linus and Charlie Brown. Then you have the tree, which is Peppermint Patty and Charlie Brown, and then you have the piano, which is these two guys. It's really a cool little way to set up these scenarios, almost play-like.
And I'm liking the look of this strip in this era. We had mentioned that not too long ago he switched to, it looks like, a different size. He has almost perfect squares now, I guess, for each panel, and he's probably working smaller than he was before. And to me, it seems like it took a while for him to kind of get into.
Yeah, I do too.
Really being comfortable in that, and I feel that now.
May 15th. Snoopy and Woodstock are atop the doghouse. Snoopy is thinking/saying to Woodstock, "One of the worst things that can happen to a person is to know his own destiny. One should never try to look into the future." Then, in panel 3, we see Snoopy giving the side eye to Woodstock, and Woodstock, who is looking to his right, or to his left, to panel right, into the next and last panel, where Snoopy yells at him, "I saw you peek!" And Woodstock blushes. Well, that's obviously right up my alley. I love that.
Well, in comic strips, the future is to the right.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
This joke would not work in Japan.
I guess.
Yeah, I wonder what they do about that. If they would reprint it, would they?
Well, they'd have to flip the whole thing.
Would they swap it? Because no, the future's going looking the wrong way. They just flip the entire strip, and just that's how you'd read it.
Yeah,
just do a mirror.
I've often thought about that when they're doing it in like manga translations. Where it's the suit, the buttons are on the wrong side of the suit, or the sword is in the wrong hand, or whatever. And I believe a lot of times they're going through and trying to make as many changes as they can to make it read left to right.
Right, because I know there's different philosophies about that, where the purists basically want to start it so that you're experiencing it as closely to the way the artist drew it in the first place, but you have to adjust your mind to that.
Yeah.
And so, some of the more popular books where they're concerned that the reader that's picking it up won't know that will make some concessions, and other ones won't as much.
Right. And when I was young, I mean, it was the 80s, I think, when a lot of manga started getting translated into America, and they were all switched left to right. But now if you buy a lot of those series, they don't even make the attempt. You just have to, like you're saying, flip your brain and figure out how to read them right to left.
Which I guess makes it easier on the person who's trying to deal with it.
You can make that flip in your brain. You're seeing it the way it was intended to be seen. So, I mean, that's much closer than having someone in a production department flip stuff around. But
yeah, I would think so. Obviously, for our purposes, we're not going to be doing a mirror image of the lettering or anything when they translate it. So it's not exactly the same experience. You're fighting on the reading, going the opposite direction, right? But the image is the way the artist drew it, which I guess is as close as you're going to get. Now, they often will do that where it's like very vertical, right, just like their text would often be, right? So you're reading little short dashes left to right, left to right, left to right. So maybe it's not that different than if you were reading the opposite direction, the way it would be done in Japan. but you are going against the grain of the art, if you know what I mean. So I don't know if that probably makes much less of a difference than if they actually flipped the artwork from the artist's initial intention. And as artists, we can all say, you know, one of the things you do when you try to draw something accurately is you flip the page over and look at it through like a light box, or if you're working digitally, because if you're not quite sure, if you think you're getting kind of wonky, if you flip it the other way, you can see some of the weird distortions you've done and you can fix it. So I'm wondering if that's true for the artists in Japan. They're like, oh, don't flip that because it looked okay to me.
Oh, I used to think about that all the time. Right? Please don't flip it.
Isn't it weird though that your eye can see something that looks just right the way you're drawing it, but if you flip it, all of a sudden it looks so distorted. I don't understand that. I don't know if that's an individual thing.
It's true also.
And like maybe it looks wonky to the person who's looking at it straight on the first time around. It's like maybe it looked okay to you that straight on the way you drew it, and maybe to them it looks wonky because when you flip it, you know it's wonky. I don't know.
It's also true if you look at your work 10 years later, you go, holy cow, that head is twice as big as it should be. And I haven't noticed that for 10 years.
Yeah, it is strange, you know, because you spend a lot of time drawing each panel.
Yeah,
right?
no, and
so
you know, I look at it from a
your
distance.
eye would tell you the truth.
Yeah, but the time goes by and you realize that, you know, some reason this illusion that you had when you were drawing it was good is dispelled.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also a kind of a cool, mysterious thing about drawing comics when you've just taken something down to the most stylized expression of a face. You know, it's sometimes just a few lines similar to Peanuts. I've never flipped Peanut stuff. I wonder, would it look wonky at all, or is he just such a good artist that he generally nails these characters and they're not going to look odd at all?
I think they'd be probably
to do a little experiment.
Pretty close. So few lines, and he has done it. Yeah, I think they'd be pretty close.
I would think so.
Speaking of flipping a character left and right.
Oh,
June 3rd.
Here we are.
Snoopy's lying atop the doghouse, and Woodstock is standing atop Snoopy's nose. He's facing to the right. Then, in panel 2, same exact setup, except now Woodstock is looking to the left, and we see some motion lines indicating that he has switched quickly. Then in panel 3, same scenario, except Woodstock has switched to the right. And now switch back to the left in panel 4, and Snoopy says, I hate it when he plays Weather Vane.
This is a good one.
It's weird that we were just talking about this.
Yeah, I didn't look ahead.
The two-dimensional character on a weather vane.
No, but what I like about this is, you know, what do they have in common, Snoopy and Woodstock? Not much. He's a bird. Snoopy's a dog. But they both have this fascination with imitating things.
Now, do you think Woodstock picked that up from Snoopy?
Yeah.
I assume.
So, they're friends who have things in common.
Right.
Yeah, I think so, because Snoopy's definitely the hero here. I mean, the role model.
So he doesn't like to be copied. That's the problem here.
Yeah, I think so. It's like, yeah, he gets angry when Woodstock pulls off a good imitation.
I think that would probably be the worst part of it.
Also, it's on his nose, which can't be very comfortable.
Those little claws.
Yeah.
June 11th. Sally's sitting at the table in her house, and she looks like she's about to write something when Charlie Brown comes up to see what she's doing. Sally begins writing. She writes, Dear, D-E-E-R. In the next panel, Charlie Brown interjects, that should be dear. And he says D-E-A-R. In the salutation of a letter, the proper word and spelling of that word is dear, D-E-A-R. Then in the next panel, Sally continues writing. Deer are beautiful animals found in most parts of the world. This shocks Charlie Brown, who in the next panel says, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were writing about deer. I apologize. Sally says, well, I should hope so. It seems to me that a lot of the problems in this world are caused by people who criticize other people before they know what they're talking about. Charlie Brown walks away embarrassed. Then, as Sally gives him the side eye, waiting for him to be out of range, she then wrinkles up the paper, throws it over her shoulder, and writes, Dear Grandma.
Yeah, right. So there's a comment on mansplaining. But it's also really, I mean, he had this idea for a joke, and it's really tricky to pull this off.
How so? What makes this particular one hard?
Well, because it's kind of a double joke. And you don't know till the last panel that all of that happened above was a mistake on Sally's part. You think the whole thing's a mistake on Charlie Brown's part.
Right.
Especially in the fact that Charlie Brown is right, and he still can't win.
Yeah, this to me is one of the classic strips. This one I definitely remember and illustrates the characters really, really well. It's very true to the characters, and it's very funny. And it feels very real.
Yeah, he's right, and he still loses. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Yeah, Charlie Brown will never know that he was right about this one, right?
June 23rd. We're back at camp, and not only that, we have our old pal Eudora is back. And she is at camp with Sally. They are going fishing today. So they're up to the stream, and Sally is explaining the whole situation to Eudora. And Sally says, "Okay, Eudora, you fish in this part of the stream, and I'll fish down there in that part." Then Eudora, holding her stick and her string, which is being used as a fishing rod, says, "I don't think this is going to work." Sally, who's already fishing now, says, "What's the trouble?" And then we see Eudora, who has cast her string clear across the tiny little stream which they are fishing in, and says, "Either the stream is too narrow or my line is too long."
Okay, this Eudora character, I might have asked this last time she appeared. So she becomes a regular?
I mean, nobody becomes a regular to the point that they would be considered part of the big cast. Like the last ones really like that are Peppermint Patty, Marcy, and Rerun. There are these characters that come back again, like Eudora, but I wouldn't. It's not like she's going to be on lunchboxes or anything.
Okay, but would she be in the animation
as a background character?
People would know
something
her,
like that.
Yeah, and because from this strip, I cannot tell what her character trait is.
She has a hat.
Yeah, but that is not a character trait.
Well, what's your take on this version of Sally? We haven't really seen Sally being not necessarily the older kid, but the kid who knows more than somebody else. This is maybe the first time we're seeing that in her character. What do you think of that, Michael? How does this seem consistent to you and who she is? And does it bring anything out in Sally's character?
Well, are we assuming Eudora's younger?
Not necessarily, but maybe less experienced. And it's funny because Sally was never going to camp, right? She was always...
Yeah. So I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's in Sally's character either.
Well, it might be, vicariously through her brother or something. She's learned some things about camp, right?
Uh-huh. Because she's usually wrong about the world.
Yeah, it's an interesting take on Sally. It might be surprising that she's like this. I mean, Jimmy, what do you think about this part of Sally coming out when she genuinely knows something more than another character?
I think it makes total sense. Because what I think it is we're all different depending on the group that we're in. The way of us interact with each other is different than we would interact if we were in some sort of business meeting somewhere, or if we were at a Christmas party or whatever with people we didn't know. So I think she found herself in this role. It's familiar to her because she certainly knows enough people who are telling other people what to do. And Sally has that in her, like the deer thing. She is absolutely ready to tell people when they're wrong, even if she's the one who was actually wrong. So I think this makes total sense to her. She knows something. She's going to take charge. I see her as a take charge gal when she grows up.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like, Sally feels very real to me. I don't see too many moments where it's inconsistent. And there are quite a few sides to Sally, right? We see her in a relationship with Linus and with her big brother. And now we see it with Eudora. And even though she is different with everybody, it's all of a whole. It feels like somebody who's a very real character. Yeah, she's got her complexities too, which I really enjoy and appreciate. I mean, what's the closest character to Sally that you've seen elsewhere in fictional storytelling?
Boy, I have to think about that.
Oh, I'd have to probably go with Hamlet,
Yeah.
I would think, or
Beowulf.
Yeah, I think
she's pretty unique, right?
She is probably the most realistic in a lot of ways, in the sense that she has lots of different sides to her personality. She has relatively realistic kid emotions and stuff. She doesn't like school. She doesn't want to go to camp. She doesn't like rules. And Peppermint Patty has a lot of realism to her too, but Peppermint Patty also has a lot of she went to a obedience school instead of of an elementary school. So there's a little more crazy to Peppermint Patty stuff. So I think maybe Sally is like the most fully rounded in realistic terms character.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely truth to that. She really is a cool character. And I'm thinking, and she's maybe a modern character in the sense that she gets away with seeing the world the way she wants to, and doesn't get as much blowback about it than as other characters do, or just in general. And let's say this was set in the 1800s, if this was like a Pride and Prejudice character, right. I think she'd get a ton of blowback for the way she sees the world. And Schultz lets her, for the most part, get away with saying something that is, or has a unique way of seeing it that nobody else sees it, and she's not getting dumped on. Charlie Brown, occasionally, we've seen it this year, will try to correct her on issues of fact, right? But generally, as a character, I mean, the teacher, you get little pieces of it that she's not like the best student in terms of her grades, so she's getting that kind of negative feedback. But as a whole, it seems to me a very unique modern character, that it is somebody who sees the world in a very unique way and does not get shut down for it.
Well, she does get shut down by the teacher a lot, because Sally, which seems kind of alien to me, because as, not a great student, I didn't want attention, but we always see her in front of the classroom trying to make a joke. And the teacher kind of reprimanding her for saying something stupid. She doesn't seem to mind that.
No, she doesn't. It seems like whatever she's getting is so gentle, it's not going to stop her from being herself. Like she's getting it. It's like the old squeaky wheel gets the grease thing. That is probably the classic Sally strip to me. Is she's griping over the grade she got for her coat hanger sculpture. I mean, that is such a classic Sally strip. And in that one, she wins, right? She makes her case. And she makes a really good case, right? For why you can't judge a coat hanger sculpture and grade it very
Maybe
easily. She'll
be a lawyer someday, because that is a very compelling argument.
Yeah, I could see her as an advocate or a lawyer, or whatever she really believed in. I could see her going all out for it. Once she finds the thing that's worthwhile to her.
Absolutely.
I think she'd be a fun character to be around a lot, right? Of all of the Peanuts characters, she'd constantly delight you with this craziness.
I do think so. July 2nd, Snoopy's playing tennis, and he's playing against Woodstock. This is really going to be one that you're going to want to look at, because my description is not going to do it justice. They're batting the ball back and forth, and apparently Snoopy scores a point and says to Woodstock, "If you're gonna fool me with a drop shot, you'll have to disguise it better than that." And in the next panel, we see Woodstock has disguised the tennis ball with sunglasses. Liz likes that one, certainly. All right, Liz, why? Why is that so funny?
It surprised me. I was just following along panel by panel, and it just came out of nowhere and totally cracked me up.
I was the same way, Liz. That's why I nominated it. It's so silly, but it's genuinely funny. And then you just think about Woodstock, right? Just this scenario is so absurd in the first place, that they're playing tennis. So he's playing tennis with a bird who's got a racket that's maybe the size of the tennis ball. But then he happened to have a good old handlebar mustache on hand to affix,
which is
to the tennis
Chekhov's
ball.
mustache, because we have seen that mustache disguise earlier.
Yeah, and it went off in the third act, all right.
Well, here is something that could only be done as a comic strip, because if you did this as an animation, you have to slow the ball down or something. So
it stopped in midair.
Yeah. That's some English he put on that.
Frankly, I find it a little hard to believe.
The discerning eye.
Oh, man. July 11th. Snoopy is playing tennis again. And he's playing with a character called Molly Volley, who we're going to see a little bit of. But don't get too excited, because it's not like she's the new Peppermint Patty. But anyway, he's playing with Molly Volley, and Molly says, "All right, partner, it's match point. We have to concentrate. That's the secret, partner. Concentrate." And then in panel 3, Snoopy, out of nowhere, pulls out an envelope and says, "I got a letter from my brother Spike today." In the middle of the match. And then he says, "Has anyone ever noticed that the portrait of Carl Sandburg on a 13-cent stamp looks like Pancho Gonzalez?" And I think we all have, obviously. I mean, that's completely relatable. That's the genius of Schultz. He puts these things in that everybody knows. Everybody gets that.
Peanuts Obscurities Explained.
Right. Yeah. So, again, one of those crazy things that Schultz noticed that he finds a way to incorporate into the strip that nobody would really have. I don't think there were people walking around that's like, this is in the newspapers. Carl Sandburg looks like Pancho Gonzalez in new stamp. But it is true. There was a stamp that came out, and I looked at it, and he's right. Pancho Gonzalez was an American tennis player. He does bear a good resemblance to the stamp that came out that year for Carl Sandburg. So maybe we could put that into an obscurities image. If you guys want to check the website, we could see what on earth he's
awesome.
talking
Well, I
about.
want to check that out personally,
because he is absolutely right. It is pretty funny that Schultz is just obsessing, and this is not the only time this year that is the punchline. He does 2 Pancho Gonzalez, Carl Sandburg jokes this year. So I was pretty impressed with that. That's dedication.
Do we need to explain who Carl Sandburg is?
That's a good point. So Carl is a poet, right?
Yes.
And a children's book author.
Oh, what did he work on?
Oh my God, Rutabaga Tales. It's like the funniest thing ever.
Cool.
Yeah,
I will check that out.
Rutabaga Stories. I'm not sure, but anyway, listen to the audio book of that. I think he's reading it. It's hilarious.
He was good enough to get it on a U.S. stamp, so obviously very highly thought of.
Well, he was the poet laureate.
Nice. Do you know when that was?
Well, I would have thought it was earlier, kind of the Robert Frost era, but this is the 70s. So.
Well, he is dead in 78. He died in the 60s. July 31st. Okay, so this is the end of a sequence where they are trying to get Spike adopted. And Charlie Brown comes up to Snoopy, who's sitting atop the doghouse, and Charlie Brown says, "Spike just left." And then Snoopy says, "Spike left?" And then Charlie Brown says, "We couldn't find a home for him around here, so he decided to hitchhike back to Needles." Charlie Brown continues, "I loaned him a few things to make the trip easier." And then in panel 4, we see Spike with all his belongings in his hobo sack, but he also now has a little bag and a television set, which is picking up Hogan's Heroes, because we see Spike hitchhiking on the side of the road and watching a TV that's saying, Colonel Hogan. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is if you go to the Peanuts wiki, you could see that these Colonel Hogan strips, there's a couple of them where Spike is watching Hogan's Heroes, that when they're reprinted, they're Colonel Hogan. But when they were in the papers, they were Mr. Spock.
Really?
Huh.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I don't know. I was wondering if I don't have access right now to the 1978 book because a bunch of my stuff is packed up. But if anyone has that Fantagraphics book and they mention why it is, that would be really interesting to know.
Yeah, I see it here in the book, but
well, Star Trek was canceled
Years before
But
this.
so is Hogan's Heroes.
But Hogan's Heroes was
Right.
running on
They were
rerun. I guess
both-
Star Trek was too.
Yeah, I would think that in 1978 it would have been a wash between Colonel Hogan and Mr. Spock. That's really odd.
Only weird thing is, could it be? Well, I mean, this is too stupid to even. I'll say it out loud because what difference does it make? We're 80 some episodes in. People have already made their opinions on whether I'm stupid or not. But could it just be because it's Sergeant Schultz and he was Sergeant Schultz? I mean, not for the Germans, of course, but
No one would put that together.
Wow. So you're saying that
no, I'm not. I'm
you wouldn't
definitely
want to
not.
make the connection?
Whatever I was saying, I'm not saying it anymore.
Yeah.
Could the Peanuts wiki be wrong?
No, because they show it. They show
Oh,
the
wow.
two strips. They're the two panels. It's wild.
So wait, the Hogan's Heroes was in the original.
No, it's the new.
No.
So the Star Trek was
was
in the original
Spock.
gag. Spock was in the original gag,
Yeah.
which was 1978.
That's really, really interesting.
And frankly, if you're talking about for reprinting, Star Trek has longer legs than Hogan's Heroes, certainly.
Yeah, I would think by 78, it would at least they'd be crossing paths in terms of popularity.
Yeah, isn't that the year like the Star Trek the Motion Picture?
No, next year.
Okay, so it's a mystery.
Hey, or if anybody out there has any possible ideas as to why they switched those out, I would love to know. And you could find us and tell us this a bunch of different ways. You can send us an email. We're unpackingpeanuts@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter, where we're at unpackpeanuts. And on Threads, we're also Unpack Peanuts, correct?
Correct.
And on Blue Sky and Facebook, we are Unpacking Peanuts. And we would love to hear from you. And if you have any insight into why on earth we switched from Mr. Spock to Colonel Hogan, I'd certainly love to hear. We're going to take a break right now, get some snacks, get a little beverage, and then we'll come back and we're going to finish up 1978, give you our strips of the year and MVPs. So stay tuned.
Hi, everyone. We have a special bonus event coming up exclusively for our generous supporters. On Saturday, December 30th, we'll be doing a live Q&A with the hosts and give you a behind-the-scenes look at the podcast. Our plan is to make these sessions a regular feature for Patreon subscribers. All the details are available on our website, unpackingpeanuts.com. We hope you'll join us live on Zoom Saturday, December 30th at noon Eastern Time.
All right, and we are back. Hope you got a good snack. Hey, Liz, do we got any mail? 'Cause I'm just hanging out here in the mailbox.
We do. Tim Young writes, I agree with you about the sequence introducing Snoopy as a helicopter in 1977 Part 1. We discussed the fact, and Harold thinks that the Snoopy helicopter strips sort of seemed out of order. So Tim writes, I agree with you that the sequence in introducing Snoopy as a helicopter is not well constructed, but I disagree about the strips being out of order. I've always assumed, I remember these strips in the paper in 1977, that after Linus sees the chopper coming, Woodstock then lands the chopper, consults with Sally, and takes off again. We just don't see the landing. I think it's weird that after Linus's exclamation, we have to wait 3 days for the reveal. I think Schultz should have just shown the chopper landing in the last panel of January 29th.
That is a much more generous and accurate response, I think, than what I said. I'm with you on that. I think I stand corrected. Of course, he has to negotiate the terms with Sally. He was coming that way, and Sally was right there with Linus, so he's landed and is talking to Sally. That makes sense. And then once that's been negotiated, then he heads off to save Linus.
And then Tim goes on to say, I remember my family puzzling over the NAM punchline. I guess my parents were not familiar with that abbreviation for Vietnam. Nobody in my family was the right age to have been drafted in that era. I remember we checked the dictionary for what the initialism NAM might stand for.
Wow.
I did wonder at the time if it meant Vietnam, but couldn't be sure. And I feel as if I remember my mom doubting that.
Wow. Well, I could see that, given that you might not think that Schultz would go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's pretty cool that your family cared that much about Peanuts. That you were like, you got to figure the gag out. Yeah, that was its own obscurity in 1977 or whatever. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know when I first heard that term. Obviously, it was being used by soldiers, and I guess it wasn't used in the news. It wasn't used it was something that was used for those who were actually there for the most part, maybe. Do you guys remember when you first heard the term, or Michael, that was there?
Well, the first time I ever heard it was when Marvel released that comic book, The Nam. I thought that was an excellent comic book with Michael Golden art.
It has an apostrophe, though, before the N, I believe. Yeah, Michael Golden art. I bought number 1.
Oh, I actually visited my daughter at her college and went to a used bookstore. This was a few months ago. And sure enough, they had like the whole complete run of Michael Golden Nam comics for $1 a piece, and it was a 50% off day. So I got them all. But the conceit behind it was that it was the writer, Doug Murray, I think his name is. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But it's based primarily on his experiences in the war. And since it was a monthly comic book, a month passed in the story just the way the month passed in real life.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
So they're following the newspaper tradition, like Little Orphan Anne.
Yes, very much so.
A different day every time.
Yeah. Then, of course, Golden leaves and they bring someone else in. And, of course, editorial gets involved and messes it up. But for that first 12 years or so, beautiful. Great. 12 years. First 12 issues or so. Very good.
Wow.
And then we have another message from a new listener.
All right.
L. Garfold. She writes, I have only just discovered your podcast a few weeks ago, but it's become one of my favorites in that short time. And then she says, she and one of her online friend groups love Peanuts as well. And one of the favorite topics of discussion is Schrucy, which is the relationship name for Schroeder and Lucy, and analyzing them through all the media that feature them. And then she says, I think it would be a treat for all of us if you did the idea someone suggested in the 1976 episode and do a whole episode about the Beethoven Day strips this or next year. It would really be neat to see your in-depth analysis on them.
All right, let's do it. All right, you're sold.
All right.
I'm going to do it. We'll figure it out.
Schrucy. I like that.
Thank you so much for writing. Yeah, I mean, Michael, you have gone on record as saying you really enjoy the Lucy Schroeder relationship. What do you like about it, actually, Michael? Do you like the immaculate consistency of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the setup's virtually the same, and then the punchline's usually pretty good and different.
Which you really can't ask for more in a comic strip.
Yeah, I mean, there's strips that would just do that.
Yes.
And I don't know if anybody saw this. It popped up in my feed. The Atlantic has an article on Snoopy that came out on October 26th. I think you have to have a subscription to read the entire article. But it's by Elise Hannum. It's called The Hero Gen Z Needs, Snoopy. You can't help but feel overwhelmed in a tumultuous world. Sound familiar? So I thought that was interesting that they're seeing relevance in this character for a generation that really wasn't around to see it the first time.
Wasn't around. Wow, that's great. Well, boy, if that isn't the definition of art, something that is going to continue.
Where were they?
They were hanging out with Linus, having a good time before they were born.
Okay.
But it's interesting, the idea that Snoopy often feels overwhelmed in a tumultuous world and is dealing with it with imagination.
Yeah. It's a brilliant character. It's been a joy to watch him grow and change from that little tiny dog in those early strips to becoming this icon that trends, that strides across the world.
Yeah, you guys have heard of Q scores or Q ratings?
Sure. Yeah. Our weatherman at the TV station I worked with had the highest Q rating on the East Coast back then of any market.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a Q rating is put out by a specific company. They do this where they interview people on a regular basis and they ask them about celebrities, like you said, weather, forecast personalities, characters, and they ask people, number one, have you heard of this person or character? and then do you like this person or character? And then they use a formula between those two. I think they maybe multiply one by the other to get the Q rating. Obviously, Snoopy's awareness level is through the roof. And I must imagine that the likability of Snoopy is also through the roof. It's hard to imagine a person or character who would be higher rated than Snoopy, right? He's just pretty irresistible as a character. I've never heard anybody say, I hate Snoopy. You know?
All right. Well, thank you for writing. I love to hear from you. What do you guys say we get back to the strips?
Yes.
Sure.
August 20th. Linus is standing there and he's hearing someone bark off in the distance, some puppy, and he contemplates to himself, why do dogs sit in cars and bark? Then he walks over to Sally, who's playing in a sandbox, and he says to her, I was just over in the parking lot by the supermarket. There was this dog in the back of a station wagon, and he was barking and barking and barking. Linus continues, the windows were down a little, so he had enough air, but I wonder why he was barking. Was he mad? Was he afraid? Was he lonely? Then the two walk over to Snoopy, who is lying on top of his doghouse, and Linus says, if Snoopy could talk, maybe he could tell us. Snoopy sits up, looks after them as they walk away, and he thinks, I wouldn't even try. There are some things you can never explain to a layman.
Yep, Snoopy's a professional dog.
But isn't that interesting that sometimes they know exactly whatever strange thing Snoopy is thinking, but he can't talk, so they can never find out the answer to this question.
It would be very difficult to live in the Peanuts world. There's a lot of confusion happening, I think. September 5th. Charlie Brown and Lucy are out looking at the stars at night. And Lucy says, do you think you have a lucky star, Charlie Brown? Charlie Brown says, I don't know. Lucy looks at Charlie Brown and says, I think you do, Charlie Brown. But then in panel 4, we see a shooting star which is falling to Earth. And Lucy says, and there it went. And this is a strip we talked about when William Pepper was our guest.
It's time for the Peanut Time Machine.
This one cracks
Poor
me up
Charlie Brown.
every time I read it. Poor Charlie Brown. This is a brutal strip. It's Lucy doing what Lucy does, which is crush Charlie Brown, basically.
Right.
I think throughout, not just the strip, but throughout Lucy and Charlie Brown's relationship, I think she does actually have his interest at heart. She's just really can't help herself from putting her thumb down on what she perceives as a weaker person.
Oh, I invite you to contemplate what the Van Pelt parents must be like.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to hang
Absolutely.
out at Linus and Lucy's. I'll take Charlie Brown's barber dad any day of the week than whatever is going on in that house.
Agreed.
I find that Schultz says that later on in his career, he tried to make the characters less nasty. And this strip is beyond my purview. This is 1978. So I'd never seen this one. But it seems to me Lucy is not trying to put him down. She's just saying he's unlucky.
Right. Yeah, I do think that's true.
I mean,
Lucy feels like she's just speaking truth.
Which makes it all the more brutal in a way.
Right.
She's not just being snide and saying, "Hey, I'm going to point out something that makes you feel bad." I think that's how you are. I mean, it's how it comes across, and in a way, that's even tougher. I'm fascinated by what you're saying, William, about how you think that Lucy ultimately has Charlie Brown's best interests in heart based on who she is. I think that's a really fascinating insight because Lucy, obviously, we get over 17,000 strips. We're going to get all sorts of different aspects of characters, but there is this strange through line that Lucy feels like she knows best. She knows better, not only for herself, but for others. And, she's got the psychiatrist booth and she's, there's a lot and she engages with Charlie Brown so much. And, with Schroeder, she's infatuated, but with Charlie Brown, sometimes he looks like a little bit of a project for her. Right. I mean, even maybe in some ways, even more so than Linus on a deeper level.
Well, and if you assume that, and I have never thought about it that way, but if you assume that what William's saying is true, that accounts for why she's likable and Patty and Violet aren't.
Yes.
Right?
I like that.
Well, yeah, we like. September 8th. Sally is giving a report at the front of class, and she says, King Tiglath-Pileser. Oh, good. You know what?
Skip this one.
This school, I have big issues with this school. No wonder everyone's always getting D's. Let's try. Is it Tiglath-Pileser? That sounds good. King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria conquered many nations and carried off their booty. This meant that none of the little babies had any booties. Then the classroom just erupts in laughter, and Sally yells, "If it had happened to you, maybe you wouldn't be laughing."
Oh my, yeah, these are some in-depth reports.
What do you guys think about the subtle changing of certain characters, particularly the girls' clothes, as we get closer to the 80s?
I did notice that we just had her at a sandbox.
Yeah, and she's wearing, regular like 70s clothes, as opposed to her little blue polka dot dress that she wore through the first few decades.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Lucy pretty much has stayed in her classic dress with the tie in the back.
She changes too. See, though, if we look to April 23rd, we see Lucy in more modern clothes.
Just swaps out occasionally.
Looks like a turtleneck.
And yet she's wearing her dress to play baseball.
Well, I remember at one point reading somewhere or seeing an interview with one of the Schultz kids who said that he was really just drawing his childhood, and people didn't dress like that anymore. And it was, I think it might have been one of the girls who suggested he maybe update at least the girls' clothing.
Yeah,
again, I could always go back.
He could mix it up a little bit sometimes, have them something else.
Yeah.
I mean, because to me, the most archaic looking one is Lucy.
Yes,
right? She's got the ruffle collar and the puffy sleeves and the saddle shoes and the little dress tie in the back. Yeah, and that's so iconic. I could see why it makes sense. You mix it up a little bit, right, and see if people respond. If people go ballistic. Why is she wearing a sweatshirt? Stop it. You're ruining my life.
September 12th. Snoopy is atop his doghouse with Woodstock, and Charlie Brown comes up and he sees that there are 2 notches that have been cut out of the side of Snoopy's doghouse. And Charlie Brown says, 2 notches? I'd give anything to know what you're keeping track of. 1 notch yesterday? 2 notches today? Where do you go from here? Well, Charlie Brown, probably 3 notches is my guess. But anyway, Snoopy starts singing From Notches to Mobile, and Woodstock finds that hilarious. But I'm going to need someone to explain it to me. Get it?
This is a obscurity, yeah.
I don't know the song,
you are
but
correct, sir.
It's got to be Natchez to Mobile.
It's actually a 1941 Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer song
Johnny
from
Mercer.
the film Blues in the Night. And the most famous line that really makes my mama done told me.
Oh, from Natchez to
Mobile,
my mama
from
done
Memphis
told
to
me.
St. Joe.
From Natchez to Mobile, from Memphis to St. Joe, wherever the 4 winds blow. They blow everywhere.
Yeah, sure.
Harold Arlen never stepped foot out of New York.
I think the song is called Blues in the Night, and it was from this film, and it became a standard, and standard enough for Charles Schultz to include it as a punchline in 1978. So
30 years later.
October 9th, John Lennon's birthday, for our designated Beatle reference. Eudora and Sally are watching as Linus walks by carrying his blanket. Eudora says, "Who's the kid with the blanket?" And Sally says, "That's Linus. He's my sweet baboo." And then from off panel, Linus yells, "I'm not your sweet baboo." Sally says to Eudora, "He is, but he isn't. But he is."
This might be the first blanket appearance this year.
It's definitely more of a rarity.
Okay. And then this leads into a sequence, right? Yeah, this is not just a one-off. It flows into a storyline.
Is that after?
Yeah, so Eudora starts to ask Linus about the blanket because it's all new to her.
So that's coming up. Oh, yeah, it's coming up the next one.
Well, we could read it in the very next strip. October 10th. Eudora comes up to Linus and asks him, "Why do you carry that blanket around?" And Linus says, "It's hard to explain." Eudora says, "May I try it?" And Linus says, "I guess so," and hands it to Eudora, who says, "It feels nice." She then holds it up to her cheek, just like Linus does, and she says, "How do I look?"
She'd look better if she was sucking her thumb.
Does Eudora feel like a grunge character to you? Like she's ahead of her time with her knit cap?
Yeah, but it's not grunge time yet.
But it is total a grunge character, 13 years ahead of it. It very much. The beanie, everything looks a little baggy.
Yeah, Schultz ahead of its time once more. It's probably what inspired the look. Everyone was remembering Eudora.
Well, do you remember there was a t-shirt, original grunge, that was Pigpen? I mean, it was very popular. Then October 11th, Charlie Brown and Linus are at the thinking wall, and Charlie Brown says, "You did what?" Linus says, "I gave my blanket to Eudora." "What could I do? She smiled at me." Charlie Brown says, "I'm surprised at you. You usually don't do dumb things like that." Then Linus, with head in his hand, says, "It was a cute smile."
Now, did Linus just totally forget the other
Truffles?
Truffles.
Truffles.
Well, if you can't be with the truffle you love the...
Jeez, that's an obscurity.
So it's interesting. This is the second time we've seen Linus, other than Miss Othmar, I guess, be kind of taken by somebody, and so Eudora has worked her way into his heart. All it took was a cute smile,
and right in front of Sally, no less.
Well, Sally's around a lot when these things happen.
Come on, Linus, get it together.
He's a sucker for a cute smile.
Eudorable.
Oh, who isn't, Linus? We get it. All right. So now at this point, this spins off into a longer story where ultimately the cat next door has Linus's blanket.
Right. Yeah. It's it takes some weird turns. We get Disco Snoopy.
Oh yeah.
Oh God.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Not what I was expecting in this storyline. And next thing you know, the cat somehow has gotten Linus's blanket. But I think it's pretty random. I think Eudora just hands it over to the cat. We don't know any motivation other than she chose to give it to the cat. But yeah, I think Linus recruits Snoopy to get Eudora to give him the blanket. And that's why he decides he should become Disco Snoopy, because what would be more irresistible than Disco Snoopy in 1978? We wind up with a fight once again with Snoopy and the cat trying to get the blanket back for Linus.
That brings us to November 1st. Charlie Brown is witnessing the carnage and he says, "It's over. The fight is over." He walks back and we see a completely disheveled Linus and Snoopy. And Charlie Brown says, "Hey, you guys, the fight is over." And then Charlie Brown looks off panel in panel 3 and we see who won the fight. It's our hero Woodstock, emerging victorious with the blanket.
That's a great moment for Woodstock.
It is.
He's the hero of the day.
He looks so... Yes, that smile is great.
Yeah. Little smile on Woodstock's face.
He looks a little disheveled, but he's mostly okay. He survived it well.
Yeah, it wasn't without a tussle, it looks like, but good old Woodstock comes through.
And that brings us to November 2nd, where Woodstock and Snoopy are atop the doghouse, and Snoopy says, "I can't believe you survived the fight with the cat next door. You not only won the fight, but you rescued that kid's stupid blanket." "I'd love to hear how you did it," says Snoopy to Woodstock. And then in panel 4, we see a word balloon filled with little chirp marks. And Snoopy rolls his eyes and thinks, "But not in detail."
Oh.
I think the little check mark, scratch marks for the chirping is one of his best inventions as a cartoonist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally buy it from the very first time I see it. You know what it is. It, to my knowledge, was never done before. It's perfect.
It is perfect. And you know what? Woodstock like Michael said, it's a good big moment for him. He deserves to be able to hold forth a little bit. Maybe even burnish the story a little bit.
Yeah, then I gives him the right.
I swoops to his left. What they should have done is gone in as the Snoopy copter and swooped in, and they could have just grabbed it.
It's a whole action movie.
Distract them. Yeah, I could see that as an animated.
Oh, see, that's our pitch. Okay, that's the pitch this week. It's
Where's your blanket, Linus?
It's a heist movie where someone has the blanket and they have to stage an elaborate Ocean's 11 style rescue to get the blanket back.
So is this the last we see of the blanket?
No. You will see the blanket forever.
Yeah, that'd be a shame if they went through all that to get it back and Mitchell's like, I'm done.
Woodstock keeps it. That would be great.
Yeah.
November 8th, Snoopy's playing football with Peppermint Patty. And she says to him, let's try something different for the kickoff. Snoopy is wearing a helmet, by the way, which I don't know, it just make me laugh. Peppermint Patty continues, instead of having someone hold the ball with his finger, let's use a kicking tee. Snoopy goes, a kicking tee? Right. And then in panel 4, we see poor Woodstock is what's being used as kicking tee.
Yeah, with this little stoic, confused look on his face. Well, if Charlie Brown was going to try to kick it, I guess he wouldn't.
Yeah, that's true. We don't know. But, well, not yet anyway.
I guess he's a good kicker if someone doesn't take it away from him. But yeah, look, everyone's kind of stoic in this strip, which leads to maybe doing the anger and happiness index this year. How does this year feel compared to last year? Last year,
I believe that this year is slightly up on anger and slightly down on happiness.
Slightly up on anger and slightly down on happiness. Okay, what do you think, Michael?
I take the 5th.
Okay. All right. It won't incriminate you.
It's just a civil podcast, though, so we can draw a negative inference from that.
Well, you're right about slightly, but it's flipped. It's the opposite. So we had 77 angry strips, which was not much in 1977. We had 77 and 77, and this year we have 70. That's low. And then for the happy, we went from 111 to 107. So I guess they're both down. So you got it half right, or 3/4 right, because you said slight.
Oh, all right. Okay.
So that stoic nature of the strip, I think, is a real thing. You know, we had that years ago. I think there was a time when there was a little bit more of this kind of stoic humor, and he's going back to it. It's interesting, and he's good at not overplaying expressions. We've said that before. And, you know, we know the characters really well now, and he's finding humor in the moments where, you know, the other characters aren't finding something funny, but we are, because of the situations he's thinking up. So it's interesting to see that that's where his style is going 28 years
He has
in.
talked about in interviews later in his life where he talked about being a believer in mild cartooning, meaning that you don't oversell the emotion, don't oversell the punchline or the reaction to the punchline. But boy, that's hard to resist, especially if you're not 100% maybe confident or convinced in just the quality of the joke.
Well, yeah, that shows a real confidence, right, in your work, that you don't have to oversell it. And he knows that people normally would just be glancing through these strips in the newspaper. And certainly he is a fan of the Bigfoot old style cartooning. We know that. But it is interesting that it took him 27 years before we had a fourth panel where someone's feet were up in the air in response to a character's crazy action. That's good restraint. You wait 27 years when Marcy fell backward into her desk when Peppermint Patty gives her book report on the cereal box. That was the one that sent Schultz over the edge.
Well, talking about mild in reaction shots, that brings us to November 29th. Lucy and Charlie Brown are walking around outside, and Lucy says to Charlie Brown, I don't understand your question, Charlie Brown. Why should I have self-doubts? Charlie Brown says, why not? After all, you're not really perfect, you know. And in panel 3, we see Lucy's reaction, which is just wide-eyed and pure shock. And Charlie Brown then in panel 4 looks out to us and says, I've never seen anyone so offended. It registers as that, but what has made Lucy offended is a 1/16 of an inch more ink on the eye and a 1/16 of an inch more ink on the little parentheses around her eye. And the disappearance of her mouth.
Yeah, it's great.
And yet it looks almost like someone else drew it because it is such an extreme. You've never seen
it. But of all the Lucy Charlie Brown strips, I think this is one of the best over the years.
It's a real good one, and absolutely.
It really nails her personality.
Yeah, I love when you look at that panel 3, those two poses, like the way Lucy is leaning back just 5 degrees or whatever. You know, if you drew the line of her spine, it would curve just a little bit to the left, and as she recoils at the thought of not being perfect, brilliantly done.
Yeah, and the way he achieves it is he kind of just moves her legs forward under the dress.
Yeah,
that's because it's a fairly stiff design, right? So, but it works.
Oh, it totally works. December 17th, Woodstock and a variety of Woodstocks. Actually, it's just one Woodstock shaking around with the number 5.1 underneath him. And then in panel 2, we see Snoopy is reading some sort of pamphlet, and he says to Woodstock, this is kind of interesting. An earthquake is a shaking movement of the Earth's surface. He continues reading to Woodstock throughout these panels. They are most commonly caused by the jar given the Earth's surface when a fault occurs. Study of earthquakes helps us to learn more about the nature of the Earth's interior. Everyone should know what to do if an earthquake occurs. And Snoopy continues, but we do not see Woodstock sitting on top of the doghouse anymore. The safest place to stand during an earthquake is in a doorway. And then in the last panel, we see a good old 3/4 view shot of the doghouse with Woodstock standing right into the arch.
And Snoopy looking down with his ears forward.
Yeah.
I love that drawing. I mean, that to me has that shown up on a t-shirt or a mug? Or...
It would be a good one, certainly.
I mean, we haven't seen that angle. This almost feels like a drawing he had made in like the late 50s, or that's what it feels like to me, because there's a little more detail, and there's this shading of the dark in Snoopy's doghouse opening, and with a kind of a halo of light around Woodstock. It's really beautifully done. Makes me long for a couple more 3/4 views here and there in the strip, because he sure knows how to do it. And I did want to mention, surprise, surprise, on August 13th of this year, there was a 5.1 earthquake in Santa Barbara, just north of Los Angeles. So once again, Schultz's life enters into the strip in a way we can.
I figured there had to have been an earthquake around that time.
And once again, it gives you a sense of how far he is in his strips. So if he did this not too long after that, when it's top of mind, that's 4 months out. He's got a good backlog of strips for the Sundays.
December 22nd, Sally is very upset with Charlie Brown over something that happened in class. And she's yelling at him, "A fine brother you are. You let me make a fool out of myself. It isn't reindeer, it's reindeer. Why didn't you tell me? They all laughed at me. Even the teacher laughed at me. I'll never be able to go to that school again." Then Sally sits down and sniffs a sad tear, and Charlie Brown comforts her with his arm around his sister's shoulder and says, "Poor sweet baby." Which we know is something that Jeannie would say too.
Interesting. It's not a punchline now.
Not at all. Just a moment of comfort between a brother and a sister.
And it's interesting, once again, we were just talking about Sally's personality. And here's one where we do see the aftermath, that this really got to her, right? She did say something that was wrong, and it did really matter to her. She did care that she didn't get it right. And it's so funny that we've seen this year Charlie Brown correcting Sally and getting just raked over the coals for it. And he's never rewarded for telling her something that she's done wrong. And now he can't get it right because he didn't tell her. that she was getting it wrong. It's like, you got to feel for Charlie Brown there, and you got to love him all the more that he's not thinking about that at the moment. He's just trying to comfort his
Yeah,
sister.
it's a very sweet comic. I enjoyed it a lot. And it's weird, as someone who is an only child, I get I get very emotional seeing sweet brother, sister, sweet sibling moments for some reason. I'm a
total fan.
I had, I got the gamut just like everybody does. But I did have those moments with my sister, and for the same reason, Jimmy, when I would see the occasional moment when something broke through between the butting of heads, it was
right.
It was meaningful. And I think it was also instructive to me, when I was reading, I was like, this is possible. And if you can get there, it will be a special moment. And I don't think Schultz is trying necessarily to teach that. It's not didactic, but in my case, it was instructive. It's that this can happen, and when it happens, it can be special. Look for those moments. That's a great thing. It's
such a great function of art, and it's amazing that Schultz really is able to, dish that stuff out over decades. And we know who he is, we know what he's about, we know what matters to him, but he's never didactic. I mean, it's quite an achievement. Someone should do a podcast about how good this comic strip is. He is all right.
Yeah, he has tremendous restraint, and he doesn't, like we've said all along, he doesn't mind going to the dark places and staying there, right, for long periods of time. And then he'll occasionally have these little breakthrough moments, and they're just that much more powerful to me when they get there, because we've lived with these characters and we know how they struggle with each other and how they are not satisfied with their relationships.
Well, even something like the Linus giving up his blanket to Eudora thing, that's because we've read all of those hundreds of comic strips before that it has any weight at all.
Yeah. Right. And the fact that he gave it away because she smiled at him and he thought she was cute has weight, even though it seems frivolous what he's doing, because it's Linus. You're like, wow, that had that power over this character who we know how much he cares about that blanket. It makes it. And the only way you can get there is to let us into these characters' lives over and over again and make us care about them. And I'm still continually in awe of how he did that. And I can't see enough of this to learn a little bit more from him every time we go through his work.
And we're going to be back here next week learning even more from his work. So if you want to do that, well, you know where we are, so come on back. But if you want to hang out with the gang in between now and then, you can do that all kinds of ways. You could go to our website, unpackingpeanuts.com. You can email us, unpackingpeanuts@gmail.com. Over there on our website, you can find the obscurities page. You could buy us a mud pie. You could support us on Patreon. All of those things would be helpful. Buy a t-shirt or one of our books. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at Unpack Peanuts. And on Facebook and Blue Sky, we're Unpacking Peanuts. So we would love to hear from you then. Oh, and actually, I have a personal request. If you guys could do me a solid. We are doing great. We are so happy with the amount of downloads we're getting with all the new listeners, and new listeners are hopping on every week. It's so cool. But could you do me a favor? We have a sorry dearth of Apple podcast reviews. And it's only because I look at it, it bugs me. So if you guys could give us some 5-star Apple podcast reviews, that'd be awesome.
And we have something coming up on the 30th of December. Is that right? That we want to let people know about?
Yes, it's our special Q&A look behind the scenes with the hosts for our Patreon subscribers and all of the people who've been supporting us financially over the years. So that's December 30th at noon Eastern time. And there's details about how you can participate on the website.
Go, right, exactly. And
we could tentatively call it the Peanuts Patreon party. We'll all get together in the end of the holiday and looking into the new year and just kind of, just hang out with each other. And
absolutely. It's going to be great. We want you to be there. If you haven't contributed at all, that's okay. But if you want to be a part of this, you can still have time to do that. So we would love to see you there. So all I want from you guys now before we go is your MVP and your strip of the year. So Harold, why don't you go first?
Well, my favorite is the strip from June 11th. It's a Sunday strip with Sally and Charlie Brown, and Sally writes out Deer, D-E-E-R, and that leads to the conflagration with him. I think that's just a classic strip, and I think that's my favorite.
All right, and how about for your MVP?
Thanks to Charlie Brown coming around for Sally at the very end, that strip we just did, I'm going to give this year to Charlie Brown. He's a rock this year. He's holding it all together.
All right, Michael, how about you?
Well, for me, the obvious pick is April 5th. And that's where Lucy hates him when we don't win a moral victory.
Oh, darn it.
That's great.
Yeah, I thought that might be Jimmy's too. Sorry. You can pick
I'll
it
pick
too.
I have time. You pick an MVP and I'll come up with something else.
Okay. Well, I'm probably in a rut here, but due to Woodstock's sparkling description of the fight, I've got to give it to him again. I think I've done it like 3 times in a row.
Yeah, Woodstock's on
Absolutely.
a roll.
I am going to go for my strip of the year, I'm going to go with November 1st, which is Woodstock winning the fight, just because of that last panel. Woodstock carrying the blanket with his little note of victory whistling above him. So I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to give it to Linus this year because I thought that was a really great sequence and a great moment of him giving his blanket just because she had a cute smile. So there you go.
So I do have one thing I would like to throw in here as a little bonus or a shameless plug, depending on how you look at it. I've been working on a book for a number of months, and it's a parody essentially of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" by Clement C. Moore. It's the 200th anniversary of that poem, which blows my mind that this poem has lived on in American culture and our collective thoughts. And I don't know how well it's known outside of the United States, but I mean, there have been specials and things based on it and all that. But I thought, with my Mystery Science Theater background and my love of children's entertainment and pop culture, I thought, well, what could I do to kind of hopefully honor that, but also have some fun with the original poem? And so I have a book that is coming out that will be available for this holiday. It's called The Neat Before Christmas, or How Santa Soiled My Home. And I just wanted to read some verses to you from the book to give you a sense of what you would be getting into if you did order this book from me for Christmas. So that's all right with you guys.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, this is kind of in the middle of the poem. I will just start reading and you'll get what I'm. So basically there's this guy who's essentially a neat freak who is the narrator in the poem. So I'm essentially adding my own rhymes on top of the rhymes to give you an extra line that tells you a little bit more of this guy who seems to be very judgmental toward Saint Nick. So here we go. And then in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof, and I feared for our shingles that were not hoof-proof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. I gasped at the mess he'd just made, and I frowned. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. He was filthy. I can't say how out I was put. A bundle of toys was flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack with his gnarly old fingers all grimy and black. His eyes, how they twinkled. His dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His mustache as soiled as the blackest blackberry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow that's been piled by the street where they plowed weeks ago. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath, way too near that alarm that he stood just beneath. He had a broad face and a little brown belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly when I mentioned his pipe was offensively small. So there you go. That's a little preview of The Neat Before Christmas.
And where can people get that?
So I will be making it available through my website, haroldbuckholtz.com. It is should be up by the time you guys hear this. And you can also, of course, find things that are linking to what Michael and Jimmy have created. It's all be available through the unpackingpeanuts.com website if you want to find us and see what we're up to, and if you want to support us by purchasing some of the work we've done.
Yes, we would really love that. That would be great. Well, thank you, Harold. Thank you, guys. Thanks to everybody who was listening. Another fun year, another fun episode. Can't wait to see you next week. So until then, for Michael and Harold, this is Jimmy. Be of good cheer.
Yes. Be of good cheer.
Unpacking Peanuts is copyright Jimmy Gownley, Michael Cohen, and Harold Buchholz. Produced and edited by Liz Sumner. Music by Michael Cohen. Additional voiceover by Aziza Shakrala Clark. For more from the show, follow Unpack Peanuts on Instagram and Twitter, Unpacking Peanuts on Facebook and YouTube. For more about Jimmy, Michael, and Harold, visit unpackingpeanuts.com. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for listening.
You're ruining my life.